The Creature. The creature from Mary Shelley's 1818 novel Frankenstein is often called a monster, but his actions are the direct result of abandonment and cruelty from his creator and society. Victor Frankenstein spent years constructing an 8-foot-tall being from corpse parts, but the moment the creature opened his watery eyes, Victor fled in horror, abandoning his creation within hours. The creature, despite his frightening appearance with yellow skin and black lips, proved himself capable of reason, eloquence, and moral understanding. He spent months observing the de Lacy family, teaching himself language, ethics, and culture by reading Paradise Lost and Plutarch's Lives. When he finally revealed himself, seeking only compassion and community, he was beaten and driven away. The creature saved a drowning girl from a river, only to be shot by her companion, who saw only his monstrous appearance. After these repeated rejections, he approached Victor with a reasonable request: create a companion so he wouldn't face existence alone. Victor initially agreed, then destroyed the female creation before completing it, breaking his promise. Only after this betrayal did the creature turn to murder, targeting Victor's loved ones. His famous declaration captures the core of his argument: I am malicious because I am miserable. The creature recognized that his violence stemmed not from inherent evil, but from the unbearable suffering inflicted by a society that judged him solely on appearance. Victor, who brought him into existence, bore the responsibility of care, but chose abandonment instead, making the creator far more monstrous than his creation. Shylock. Shylock, from William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, written around 1596, stands as one of literature's most complex antagonists, a Jewish moneylender whose demand for revenge stems from years of systematic abuse. Set in Renaissance Venice, where Jews were confined to ghettos and forced into moneylending because Christians couldn't charge interest, Shylock endures constant persecution from the merchant Antonio and his friends. Antonio openly admits he hates Shylock for being Jewish and a usurer, regularly spitting on his traditional gabardine and publicly insulting him on the Rialto. When Antonio needs money to fund his friend Bassanio's fortune-hunting courtship of Portia, he approaches Shylock, who agrees to lend 3,000 ducats with an unusual bond. If Antonio defaults, Shylock may take a pound of his flesh. Antonio agrees willingly. When Antonio's ships fail and he cannot repay, Shylock demands his bond be honored. His famous speech asks, "Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? If you prick us, do we not bleed?" Yet despite his eloquent argument for shared humanity, the Christian characters show him no mercy. His daughter Jessica abandons him, steals his money, and converts to Christianity. At trial, Portia delivers her celebrated speech about the quality of mercy while denying Shylock any. The play ends with Shylock forced to convert to Christianity, a fate many scholars consider crueler than death in that era. Modern critics increasingly view Shylock not as a villain, but as a victim of the anti-Semitism permeating Renaissance society, a man whose extreme demand stems from a lifetime of cruelty and rejection. Eric. Eric, known as the Phantom in Gaston Leroux's 1910 novel The Phantom of the Opera, commits terrible crimes, but these are the direct result of lifetime rejection based solely on his appearance. Born with severe facial deformities that gave him a corpse-like appearance, Eric was rejected by his own mother, who couldn't bear to look at him. As a child, he was sold to a traveling fair where he was exhibited as a living corpse in a cage, displayed for crowds who paid to be horrified. Despite this brutal treatment, Eric possessed extraordinary gifts. He was a musical genius, masterful architect, inventor, and skilled magician. He escaped, and eventually used his architectural talents to help construct the Paris Opera House, building secret passages and a hidden underground lair where he lived isolated from the world. His love for Christine Day, a young soprano, represents his only attempt at human connection, but even this is tainted by desperation. While his methods are wrong, including murder and kidnapping, society created this outcome by denying him any opportunity for normal relationships or acceptance. When Christine finally shows him genuine kindness by kissing his deformed forehead, Eric is so moved that he releases her, proving compassion could have prevented his descent into violence. His final act is one of mercy, letting Christine go to be with Raoul. The tragedy isn't that Eric became a monster, but that society's cruelty guaranteed he would become one, denying him any chance at the human dignity and connection he desperately craved from birth until his lonely death in the opera house's depths. Caliban. Caliban from William Shakespeare's The Tempest, written around 1610, is called a monster and savage throughout the play, but he is actually the rightful owner of the island who was colonized and enslaved by the magician Prospero. The son of the witch Sycorax, Caliban was born on the island and lived there freely until Prospero arrived shipwrecked with his daughter Miranda. Initially, Caliban welcomed Prospero, showed him all the island's resources, fresh springs, and fertile places, teaching him how to survive. Prospero, in return, taught Caliban language, which leads to Caliban's famous bitter line, "You taught me language, and my profit on't is I know how to curse." After Caliban attempted to assault Miranda, Prospero enslaved him, forcing him to gather wood and perform menial labor while being called a monster despite speaking eloquently. The island belonged to Caliban by inheritance from his mother, making Prospero's rule nothing more than colonial occupation maintained through magical force. Modern scholars increasingly read The Tempest as an early commentary on colonialism, with Caliban representing indigenous peoples displaced by European powers. His plot to kill Prospero with the help of the drunken Stefano and Trinculo is simply an attempt to reclaim his stolen inheritance and freedom. Prospero claims moral authority and civilization, but he rules through magical coercion, not legitimate right. Caliban's savagery is defined entirely by his colonizer's standards, while his knowledge of the island's natural resources demonstrates sophisticated understanding that Prospero lacks. The tragedy is that history is written by the Prosperos, leaving the Calibans to be remembered as monsters rather than victims of theft and enslavement. Javert. Inspector Javert from Victor Hugo's 1862 novel Les Miserables represents inflexible justice and law enforcement, but his 20-year pursuit of Jean Valjean is legally justified and stems from a coherent philosophy about social order. Born in prison to criminal parents, Javert devoted his entire life to upholding the law as a form of redemption, believing that society's stability depends on strict enforcement without exception. Jean Valjean was originally sentenced to 5 years of hard labor for stealing bread to feed his sister's starving children, a sentence extended to 19 years due to escape attempts. After release, Valjean violated parole and stole silver from a bishop, crimes that legally require his arrest regardless of the bishop's subsequent mercy. Javert's worldview holds that criminals cannot reform, and that allowing lawbreakers to escape punishment encourages social chaos. Throughout the novel, Javert never acts from personal vendetta or corruption. He is incorruptible, principled, and honestly believes he serves justice. His pursuit is not sadistic, but duty-bound. When Valjean shows him mercy during the Paris uprising, sparing his life when he could have killed him, Javert faces an impossible contradiction. A criminal displaying virtue, while he, the law's representative, owes his life to that criminal. Unable to reconcile mercy with justice or Valjean's goodness with his criminal status, Javert drowns himself in the sin. His suicide demonstrates the tragedy of his rigid worldview, but his original argument remains powerful. Without consistent law enforcement, what prevents society from descending into chaos? Modern debates about law and order echo Javert's position that compassion toward criminals might endanger innocent citizens who depend on legal protection. Captain Ahab. Captain Ahab from Herman Melville's 1851 novel Moby Dick pursues the white whale with suicidal obsession. But his quest for revenge begins with a legitimate grievance. The whale deliberately attacked and destroyed his leg on a previous voyage. Unlike most whales that flee when harpooned, Moby Dick is described as unusually aggressive and intelligent, actively attacking ships rather than simply defending himself. Ahab's injury wasn't an accident during normal whaling, but a targeted assault that cost him his leg, his livelihood, and his bodily integrity. In the dangerous whaling profession of the 19th century, hunting a known killer whale was both revenge and practical safety measure. Ahab's famous declaration, "I'd strike the sun if it insulted me," reveals his broader philosophy. He sees the whale as representing hostile, malicious nature itself, not merely an animal. During the final chase, Moby Dick proves Ahab right by aggressively attacking the Pequod's boats, killing crew members who posed no immediate threat. The whale isn't just defending itself, but actively destroying Ahab's ship and men. Ahab's fatal flaw isn't seeking the whale, but sacrificing everything and everyone else in the pursuit, transforming justified revenge into monomaniacal obsession. His offer of a gold doubloon to whoever first spots Moby Dick shows he's willing to share the goal with his crew. The real tragedy is that Ahab's initial grievance was valid, his target genuinely dangerous, but his inability to balance justice with proportion dooms the Pequod. The whale was a legitimate threat that had already proven itself a killer, making Ahab's hunt reasonable until obsession transformed it into suicide mission that destroyed his ship and crew. Long John Silver. Long John Silver from Robert Louis Stevenson's 1883 adventure novel Treasure Island is the charismatic pirate leader who serves as ship's cook aboard the Hispaniola, and while he leads a mutiny to steal treasure, his pragmatism and intelligence make him the only rational actor in a story full of greed-driven fools. Silver lost his leg in the same naval action, where he managed to save 2,000 pounds, demonstrating his practical focus on survival and profit even in combat. Unlike the other pirates who are drunken, impulsive, and doomed by their own stupidity, Silver understands long-term strategy and self-preservation. The treasure everyone seeks was originally stolen by the pirate Captain Flint through violence and bloodshed, making the heroic Squire Trelawney and Dr. Livesey simply wealthy gentlemen seeking to enrich themselves further with ill-gotten gold. Silver treats young Jim Hawkins surprisingly well throughout the voyage, even offering him partnership multiple times, which is remarkably generous by pirate standards in a brutal profession. He makes no pretense about being a gentleman of fortune, the period euphemism for pirate, and is honest about his intentions, unlike the supposedly respectable gentry who hide their greed behind social status. In the dangerous world of 18th century piracy and colonial exploitation, Silver's ruthless pragmatism is simply realistic adaptation to circumstances where loyalty often meant death and sentiment was a fatal weakness. By the novel's end, Silver escapes with a portion of the treasure, making him the only major character to survive and profit from the expedition. His intelligence, adaptability, and clear-eyed assessment of human nature prove superior to both the honor-bound heroes and the foolish pirates, suggesting that in a world built on theft and violence, the pragmatic survivor might be wiser than those who pretend otherwise. Satan. Satan from John Milton's 1667 epic poem Paradise Lost serves as the protagonist of the first two books, and his rebellion against God raises uncomfortable questions about freedom, authority, and whether obedience to absolute power is truly virtuous. Originally the highest angel named Lucifer, Satan rebelled after God declared that the Son would be elevated above all angels, leading 1/3 of heaven's angels to follow him in revolt. After losing the war and falling 9 days through chaos into hell, Satan delivers his famous defiant declaration, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." His argument is fundamentally about autonomy versus submission. He refuses to be what he calls a knee-bending sycophant, even when facing eternal punishment from an omnipotent God. Satan demonstrates remarkable courage by journeying alone through chaos to reach Earth, a voyage requiring immense determination. His speeches in Hell's Council show him valuing freedom over comfort and principle over power, organizing the fallen angels and building Pandemonium as their capital. Another famous line reveals his philosophy: the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Romantic poets including William Blake and Percy Shelley saw Satan as a heroic revolutionary, with Blake famously claiming Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it. Satan's crime is pride and questioning authority, but he receives no trial, no appeal, and no mercy for his disobedience. His position raises challenging questions about whether blind obedience to power is moral, even when that power is divine. Milton, a Puritan who lived through England's Civil War, may have unintentionally created a sympathetic figure embodying Enlightenment values about questioning authority. Satan only becomes truly evil when he corrupts humanity out of spite, but his original rebellion represents the eternal tension between liberty and submission that defines political philosophy. The Grand Inquisitor. The Grand Inquisitor from Fyodor Dostoevsky's 1880 novel, The Brothers Karamazov, appears in a parable told by Ivan Karamazov, where a 90-year-old cardinal in 16th century Seville arrests Christ himself during the Spanish Inquisition and delivers a devastating philosophical monologue about human nature and freedom. Set during an auto da fe where heretics burn in the plaza, the parable imagines Christ returning to earth and performing miracles, only to be imprisoned by the Inquisitor, who argues the Church has spent 15 centuries correcting Christ's mistake of offering humanity freedom. The Inquisitor references Christ's 3 temptations in the desert, claiming Christ's rejection of miracle, mystery, and authority was an error because humans cannot handle freedom. His argument is compassionate, not cruel. Nothing is more seductive for man than his freedom of conscience, but nothing is a greater cause of suffering. He contends that the Church provides what humanity truly needs: security, certainty, and unity, even if this requires noble lies and authoritarian control. People will gladly trade freedom for bread and stability, he argues, because the burden of choice causes unbearable anxiety. The Inquisitor believes he acts from love, taking upon himself and the Church the sin of deception to spare humanity the suffering that freedom brings. Christ's only response is to kiss the old man on his lips, an ambiguous gesture that could mean forgiveness, rejection, or acknowledgement. Dostoevsky, writing during debates about socialism and individual liberty in Russia, anticipated the totalitarian arguments of the 20th century. The parable raises an uncomfortable question. If most people genuinely prefer security to freedom and happiness to meaning, is the Inquisitor's authoritarian compassion actually wrong? Modern surveillance states and safety arguments echo his logic, making this 19th century parable disturbingly relevant to contemporary debates about liberty versus control. Mustafa Mond. Mustafa Mond, from Aldous Huxley's 1932 dystopian novel Brave New World, serves as one of 10 world controllers who govern Earth, and his philosophical defense of the world state presents the most challenging utilitarian argument in literature. If a society achieves universal happiness and stability, does the loss of freedom and meaning matter? Unlike typical tyrants, Mond is highly educated, has read forbidden books including Shakespeare and the Bible, and understands precisely what his civilization sacrificed for contentment. The world state has eliminated war, poverty, disease, and sadness through genetic engineering, childhood conditioning, and the drug soma that provides instant happiness without side effects. Citizens are bred in bottles for specific social roles. Reproduction is artificial, and family bonds are eliminated as sources of dangerous emotions and conflict. Art and science are limited because they create instability and dissatisfaction. When Mond debates John the Savage, the novel's protagonist who demands the right to be unhappy, Mond articulates his position clearly. People are happy. They get what they want, and they never want what they can't get. He admits that high culture required suffering and instability, but argues most people couldn't appreciate it anyway, making the sacrifice worthwhile for universal contentment. His chilling statement, "You can't make flivvers without steel, and you can't make tragedies without social instability," presents the core utilitarian calculation. The world state has achieved what every society claims to want: citizens who are healthy, secure, and genuinely satisfied. John's passionate defense of freedom, meaning, and authentic experience leads to his violent misery and eventual suicide, potentially proving Mann's point that most humans prefer comfortable pleasure to difficult freedom. Huxley intended this as dystopian warning, but Mann's arguments remain genuinely challenging because they force confrontation with an uncomfortable question. If aggregate happiness is maximized, can a system be called evil? Modern society's relationship with technology, pharmaceutical mood management, and entertainment as pacification makes Mann's philosophy disturbingly relevant nearly a century after publication. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.